Now recording.
Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to the Fellowship of Christian Gospel Shabbat Parasha services. This week we are on Parasha or portion number 30, which is called Kedoshim, which translates into English as holy or set apart. And the Torah reading for today is Leviticus chapter 19, verse 1 through chapter 20, verse 27. Then the Haftorah portion is Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 2 through 20, Amos chapter 9, verse 7 through 15, Isaiah chapter 29, verse 1 through 24, and the Brit Hadashah, the Besorah. We have three Besorah readings today. That'd be three gospel readings. Matthew chapter 19, verse 16 through 30, Mark chapter 12, verse 28 through 34, Luke chapter 10, verse 25 through 37, and then the rest of the Brit Hadashah readings are not gospels, are Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 13, verse 1 through 14, Paul's letter to the Galatians, chapter 5, verse 13 through 26, Paul's letter to the Hebrews, chapter 9, verse 11 through 28. James' general epistle, chapter 2, verse 1 through 9. And then the first epistle of Peter, chapter 1, verse 13 through 16. As always, we start with candlelight prayer, which will be done by Amber.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with your commandments and commands us to be a light to the world. Let light shine in the darkness.
Amen. And the prayer before the reading. Blessed are you, Yahuwah Elohim, King of the universe, who sanctifies us by your commandments and who has given us your Torah, your instruction, your wisdom, your writings, your teachings, your word, and who has given us your living word, the path to salvation, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. May our eyes and our minds and our hearts be open, and our ears be open, receiving your word, and having your word written on our hearts and always before our mind. And never be afraid to proclaim your word, and to have your word bound to our hands, we may live as shown to us by your Son, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, our good shepherd. Live your will, carry out your will, die to our own will, and be reborn into your will, your spirit, Lord. May we live not to gratify or exalt ourselves, but to exalt you, Yahuwah Elohim, God Almighty, and to do your will. Amen. So, first reading is the Torah reading, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 1 through chapter 20, verse 27. And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel, and say to them, You shall be holy, or set apart. For I, Yahuwah, your Elohim, am holy. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. So see, that's a group of commandments there. Now, interesting enough, that right there, he's actually going through two of the 10 commandments, two of the first 10. He's restating them. Now, interesting enough, back in Exodus, when we read the 10 commandments, it said, you shall honor your mother it said, you shall honor your father and your mother. It said father first, then mother. Now, this one says, when it's restated here, it says you shall honor or revere his mother and his father. Mother comes first, father comes second. Sages and rabbis and scholars over the centuries have stated that the reason for that reversal in mother and father is that is to tell us the father is not greater than the mother in the family, but they are both equally the parents of the child, and they get equal respect, equal reverence, equal honor. So that's just a neat little thing there that I wanted to cover. Then, of course, next one is also one of the Ten Commandments. That's you shall keep the Sabbath, which is what we're doing right now. And you can always tell whenever someone's a commandment, because he usually ends it with "I'm Yahuwah your Elohim," or else, "I'm the Lord your God," depending on your Bible translation. So, but she ended this one. So on to the next one. Do not turn to idols or make for yourselves any gods or any Elohims, any mighty ones of cast metal. I am Yahuwah your Elohim. So, of course, God says, you shall have no other gods before me, you shall not make any idols. That's also part of the Ten Commandments, right? Now, what's interesting in this is, if you think about it, you shall make no other mighty ones, because God's is Elohim or Eloheinu, depending on how the sentence is structured. You shall not make any other Eloheinu or Elohim of cast metal. Now, we know from the New Testament that Yeshua says that the love of or pursuit of money is the root of great evil, right? He says you cannot love God and mammon, which mammon was the Canaanite god of greed or of wealth, of wanting to have wealth, wanting to become wealthy. And some translations of the Bible say you cannot love God and money. Translates the word mammon as money. So think about it. It's saying you shall not make mighty ones of cast metal. And of course, before paper money, what was money made of? Cast metal. So along with those statues of other gods that you can make out of metal or wood, we have to remember not to make money mighty ones in our life. We have to not pursue money in God. Actually, really not pursuing money at all. I mean, you have two masters. That doesn't mean that you don't work and get money. Obviously, he talks about shekels and silver shekels and all that stuff. So, not necessarily saying that you're to have no money, but that's not to be the focus. It's not to be your goal. Yes, you, especially in the current United States and most of the world capitalist economy, you do need somewhat pursue money to survive. I'm not saying anything against that. What I'm saying, though, is that our focus is to be on God and trying to get to God. Our goal is to get God. Our goal is to not get wealthy. We do need to survive, folks. We need to work to live. Very much so in this economy. But our focus is always to be on God. That's something to remember. And it goes with what Yeshua was saying, what Jesus was saying about you cannot serve God in money or God in the pursuit of becoming wealthy. So I want to focus there because that shows that, yes, money is an idol. Okay. When you offer a sacrifice of peace offerings to Yahuwah, you shall offer it so that you may be accepted. It shall be eaten the same day you offer it, or on the day after. And anything left over until the third day shall be burned up with fire. Of course, we already heard that like a few readings ago, especially whenever on Pesach we read back through Exodus and the Passover story. It's not saying anything new at this point. It's telling us old ones. It will say some new ones in a moment, and not necessarily new, because as I've been saying since week 1, Parasha 1, you find out that, Cain and Abel doing sacrifices, and Noah doing sacrifices, and Noah bringing 7 pairs of each clean animal or kosher animal, and only 2 pairs of non-kosher animals onto the ark. that tells you these commands were not actually given at Mount Sinai. They were re-given at Mount Sinai. This is not the covenant of Sinai. This is God's covenant throughout all time. He renews his covenant a lot. He renewed it 3 times with Abraham alone. Just with Abraham, he renewed it 3 times. So it's a renewing of it. It's a re-giving of it. Just as in the New Testament, Yeshua, it's not really a new covenant. It's a renewed covenant, because the Hebrew word for new and renew is the same word. And he was renewing his covenant, his marriage vows with us, his marriage contract with us. So none of this is really new, but sometimes it's the first time that we're reading it in the Torah. It doesn't mean that they didn't practice them earlier, because we know, like with the story of Judah and his sons and Tamar, that they were already practicing all these way back then in Jan. Uh, if it is eaten at all on the 3rd day, it is tainted, it will not be accepted. And everyone who eats it shall bear his iniquity or his sin or his lawlessness, because he has profaned what is holy or set apart to Yahuwah, and that person shall be cut off from his people. So, the meat that you sacrifice, you're to eat it that day or the next day. You're not to wait 3 days, because then probably not good anymore, because there's no refrigeration. But also, no, this meat was for that particular time. If you are bringing it into some other time outside of the time that he just said, you've profaned it. Profaned, and the word profanity actually just means you've made it normal. You've made it a part of your normal thing. It's no longer a special sacrificial meat for you at that point, at which point God will make it rancid for you, and anything that you're hoping to gain from it, you're not going to get any blessings that you're hoping to get from eating that sacrificed meat. Instead of getting the blessings at that point, you will get the curse. You get the sin. It's kind of like, to bring it to a modern day practice within the Catholic Church. And that is, before you take the Eucharist, the host, you're supposed to go to confession, right? You're supposed to repent. Now, some people will say, well, what happens if I don't go to confession and don't repent and still take the Eucharist? Well, then you're taking the sacrament unworthily, and now you got to add a new sin to your confession. On top of your other sins, just taking the sacrament unworthily. It's another sin. You're sinning. Instead of getting the blessing of taking in that sacrament of the body and blood of Christ, instead you get a curse that you get another sin add to you. And this is kind of the same thing actually here, in that, if you eat the the food of that offering in the first 2 days of offering it, you get a blessing. You've followed God. But if you wait the 3rd day, instead of getting a blessing, you get a curse. You've just sinned. Another sin. Because that's what it is when God curses you. You've sinned. You get a sin. You've sinned against God. You've cursed yourself at that point. So, I like to point out how biblical thing matches up with, later church practices, and that's an example there. So, yeah, then the iniquity, their sin is on them, and they are cut off. And that's the whole thing about, why in the Catholic Church, if you've done a mortal sin, that means if you've intentionally chosen to sin, why you can't eat of the communion until you've gone to confession, because you're cut off from God at that point. Until you repent, you're cut off. Therefore, you cannot take the Eucharist. If you take the Eucharist at that point, you've added another sin. And so that's exactly what's happening here. And the reason I'm giving that example is because, since the temple's gone, we can't make sacrifices anymore. And so a lot of people, that doesn't register, it doesn't make sense. So, but putting it in the context of communion, a lot more of us have had communion, but something that a lot more of us can relate to. So that's why I'm bringing it into communion there, so that it's more sensible to the modern day mind. All right. When you reap the harvest of your land, so whenever you are harvesting grains and fruits and vegetables, uh, and other crops, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edges, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. Gleanings, and that's what the psalm used. What gleanings means is, so after you go through and you harvest all of your crops once, especially if you're doing it by hand and not machine, you're gonna miss stuff. There's stuff that you didn't see, and so you skipped it. And sometimes machines skip stuff too. A gleanings is stuff when you go through a second time that you take the stuff that was missed. So what it's saying is that whenever you reap your fields, you're not supposed to go through it a second time because, and the Bible says why. So, but and I will let it say that. And so it says, and you shall not strip your vineyard bare, so your grapes, grape field, your vines. Neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard, the ones that fell to the ground. You shall leave them and the gleanings, you shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. That means the foreigner residing amongst you. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. So, what that is telling farmers, anyone who does any kind of a crop, be it grain or fruit, right? It's saying, don't take all your fruit and all your grain. Go through it once, take that, sell that so you can earn a living, do what you need to do to get by. But leave some grain, leave some grapes for the poor amongst you, and for the foreigner who is passing through your country or who's in your country, so that they may eat, so that they won't go hungry. Feed the poor is what it's saying, And Yeshua, Jesus, throughout the New Testament, so many times, is feed the poor, feed the poor. And if you remember, it was a Shabbat. Him and the apostles were walking through a field, and they were eating the gleanings. They're walking through, picking up some grain or some fruit or whatever, some grapes that had fallen, and they were eating it. And the Pharisee said, "Hey, you're harvesting on Shabbat." He said, "No, because we're not taking any of this stuff, home for later or for second meal. We're just eating this for this meal because we're hungry. We're hungry. There it is." And he was saying, so I'm not working. I'm eating, picking up a piece of food and putting it in my mouth. Is not, if I'm eating it instantly, that does not, qualify as work. What I'm saying there. And then, he talks about David and the showbreads and all that stuff, but I'm not going to get into that. We just read that a few weeks ago. So. But, so, yeah, it's saying feed the poor, leave food for the poor. If someone has no money, they should still be able to eat. So would God be in support of food banks and food stamps and WIC and stuff? Yes, he would be. It says feed the poor again and again throughout the Old and New Testament. That's one of the most repeated commandments throughout the whole Bible. There's lots of different commandments, all about feeding the poor, a whole bunch of them, and taking care of the poor, all throughout Scripture. Right. And or else it's also called loving your neighbor or loving your fellow man. So, and of course, then with I'm Yahuwah, your Elohim. Next group of commandments: you shall not steal, which again, that's another of the 10 commandments, right? Next one: you shall not deal falsely, so you shall not give false witness, and you shall not, of course, it goes beyond that in that, kind of also thou shalt not covet, in that not only is it wind up those goods, but you shall not swindle people out of their goods. Like I think it was last week, we came across that or a few weeks ago, but do not do usury, do not charge people interest. I think that was last week. You know, so and same thing there. Do not deal falsely. You know, and if you remember last week, we also besides do not charge interest, we also came across the ones that said pay your workers a proper amount of money that they may live well. So pay people living wages. That was in last week's reading. And then also in last week's reading was do not abuse your hired workers, pay them properly, as I just said. But then it continued and said, regardless to where they are native born or a foreigner reside amongst you. And then it said you are to treat your foreigner as you would your native born. You know, so doesn't matter what country they're from, you're to treat them like anyone else, and which kind of reflects what Yeshua, Jesus says in both Luke and Matthew, in that if you only love your kinsman and not the foreigner, what spiritual benefit does that have for you? For even pagans love only those who are like them, is what he says. Or heathens, he used the word heathens in Luke. Matthew uses a slightly different word. And he also says, give to those you do not expect repayment, because he said, if you only give to those, this is in Luke and Matthew, if you only give to those who you expect payment from, what's the spiritual benefit of that for you? Or even the heathen does that. Even non-believers give to those whom they're expecting something in return. So you shall not deal falsely. That's not just you shall not lie, or you shall not bear false witness. It's you shall do things to proper weights and measurements. You shall not swindle people. You shall not cheat people. You shall give them what they're due. You shall treat them properly and right. Right. We go on. You shall not lie to one another. So shall not lie. So see, we're going through the 10 Commandments again, really, right now, aren't we? So then it continues. You shall not swear by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your Elohim. I am Yahuwah. So, it's funny. A lot of people, whenever they see something like that, they misinterpret to think, oh, so I'm not to say, God, so and so curse word. It's like, no, that's not what he means by swear. That's totally not. By swear, they mean to swear an oath or to swear while under oath, under his name. And then also Yeshua says, don't make an oath at all. Don't swear at all. And again, he's not talking about curse words. He's talking about don't make oaths at all. Because what if you promise and say, I promise to God, I'm going to do this. And then something comes up and you can't. Then you're profaning his name, which is exactly what he just said here. You shall not swear and make an oath by my name falsely and so profane the name of your Elohim. And then Yeshua said, don't even swear at all by his name. Because, what if you honestly intend to do it? You're not trying to swear a false oath, but then you can't do it. Something comes up. Then you're still profaning his name. You're still using his name like any other word, right? So, don't do it. And of course, and really, if you think about it, you don't want to do it anyway, swear on my mother. What? No. Why you gonna ruin your mother's reputation at that point? Doesn't make sense. No. Just say, I'm gonna try and do it. So funny. A few weeks ago, the people who own this land, I imagine, they said someone's gonna be here on this day 2.5 weeks in the future from now. Are you gonna be there that day? I said, well, I'll try. I hope to. They said, well, are you gonna be here or not? I said, it's 3 weeks away. I'm going to attempt to, but I can't say anything. Something might come up. I might die. They said, well, we need you to give a yes or no answer. Going to be or not. Look, I just said I'm going to try my best. All I can say, I literally said, I am not God. I could die. or something come, I'm gonna have to go to the hospital that day. What more do you want? It's as much of a yes as you're gonna get from me. Pretend I said yes, but know that you know I'm not God. They got upset with me, but I'm like, I'm sorry, but really, I mean, it's 3 weeks away. I don't know. Are you gonna be home 3 weeks from now on a particular day? Maybe, right? There's a old Middle Eastern saying that translates in English as God willing. Will I be there? God willing. I plan to be there. If God allows me to, I'll be there. you know? That's why I ended up also saying to them, I ended up saying to them, I actually um, went and got that phrase and sent it to them, God willing. So I wasn't going to, swear to them, yeah, I'm going to be there. Yeah, it's 3.5 weeks away. I don't know. So, another commandment there, don't swear falsely. That also means don't lie under oath. The Bible makes it clear in other commandments, some of which we've already read about a month ago. It said, do not swear falsely in court. So anyway, we continue. You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning. So, so you shall not oppress or your neighbor or rob him, don't steal from him. But then it also specifies another form of robbing someone is to not give someone their proper wages. Now in this case, it's saying don't delay in giving their wages. But last week in the half Torah reading, it said you have to pay them the proper amount, an amount that they can live on. Not to undercut them and pay them amount that is not sustainable to live on. That was in last week's meeting. So you shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear your Elohim or honor or respect your God. I am Yahuwah. So yeah, it's not nice to, curse the deaf, say that, damn to a deaf person. What? They can't defend themselves there. Put a stumbling block, put your leg in front of a blind person so they trip. Why are you doing that? Don't wrong people. You're to love your fellow man. You're to love your neighbor as yourself. Cursing the deaf person or tripping a blind person on purpose, is that showing love? As you know, in the New Testament, Yeshua says you are to love your enemies. You're to bless them and do good for them. So, you're to love your enemies. Love everyone. Don't be cruel or mean or unkind, even if someone's unkind to you. So, you shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or differ to the great or to the wealthy. But in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. And that was about a month ago. We read this same commandment. So see, it's now going through some of the later commandments because we know there are around 613. Sometimes I actually say 360. No, 613. There are 613 commandments. The first 10 are ones that God said out loud. Before then, the people went, no, please don't say it out loud. You said out loud, our heads are going to explode and we're going to die. Instead, we'll send Moses up the top of the mountain and you can tell it to him up there. And then he'll write it down and he'll give it to us. And we promise we will do everything that you tell Moses. But please don't say any more out loud. So, that was back in the Exodus story, right? So there's more than 10 commandments. They were the first 10 that he said out loud, and then the people begged him to stop. So 613 total, depending on how you count it. And he just went over some of the 10, and now he's going over some of the others that he's already said. And so You shall you shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the life or the blood. It's the same Hebrew word. Even though life can also mean soul, but in this case it's the word blood actually. In Hebrew it's the word blood. You shall not stand up against the blood of your neighbor. I am Yahuwah. So you're not to slander, you're not to, say bad things, you know, uh, uh, and spread gossip, right? Especially if it's false. Although actually the bad things or evil tongue, as the more direct translation is, it's not actually just false things. So evil tongue, which is the Hebrew phrase, it's also you are not to say truthful bad things about someone um, that are not beneficial, are not helpful. You're not to give unconstructive criticism. The criticism that you give, the bad things that you're supposed to say about someone, are to be stuff that will improve them. If they choose to listen to you, if they're not a fool, as Proverbs talks about, right? If they're a fool, they will never listen to you. But if they're not a fool, you say bad things to them about about themselves, in the hope that they will get better and improve. You're not just to say bad things, be mean or to be cruel. That is not right and not just. You give constructive criticism. And Paul talked about last week. Um, Last week, one of our final readings was Paul saying that you are it was our final reading last week, you are to talk to your brother in love, that you are not to make them feel like they're utterly rejected and like as if they can never come back and like as if they can never repent. You're to talk to them in love, and you're to remind them that they can always repent. And repent means to turn away from their sin, turn away from their not following God, and turn to God and turn back to following God. You're to always in love remind them of that. And if they've truly repented, you are to welcome them back. You must welcome them back if they've truly repented. That's what Paul said. In fact, it was a very sad reading for me last week because it was our final reading, and it was very clear that Paul in the previous reading, which was the previous chapter that week, Paul said you're to cast this person out. This person is evil. You let him go to the devil. And then the very next chapter, Paul was like, I am utterly ashamed to show my face to you, and welcome a person back if they have deeply repented. And Paul says, I'm sorry if my words were misunderstood. And yeah, he literally said, I'm ashamed to show my face to you. And he said, invite this person back. Always approach them with love. So I feel like as if Paul meant something, and like as if his words were misunderstood, and that he later realized he could have written them better. So it's like, oh, yeah. So that was an interesting read there. It's like, oh, okay. He realized. Oh, I think it was the previous reading before that was like in like First Corinthians, and then it was like from Second Corinthians. Second layer on back. I'm sorry, I didn't instruct properly. It's interesting to see Paul, basically saying that. But yeah, so whenever we say bad things about someone, um, it's always to be constructive, never to be deconstructive, even if it's true, because that is evil tongue, and that is not okay. And honestly, that's one of the sins that I do most often. I'm very guilty of, and I've struggled with it my whole life. I continue to struggle with it. I have a tendency to point out people's flaws without necessarily trying to make them better. I do it all the time. Um, if I go to hell, if I go to Gehenna, surely that will be one of the main reasons why. You know, one of my grievous sins that I redo again and again and again. I've been working on it over the years, but I still fall into it so often. So, yeah, forgive me, God. Forgive me so much. I need to follow you better and not do the evil tongue. So, you shall not go around as a slanderer among your people. You shall not stand up against the blood of your neighbor. I am Yahuwah. See, that's interesting, so shall not stand up against the life and or blood of your neighbor. That's an interesting thing to think about. Because we already know he says you're a treat the foreigner as your native born, and not stand up against the life and or blood of someone. That is, was stand up against, right? To fight them, right? So you, especially in a violent way. So you're not to be violent and or, just fight with someone for no reason, especially. Um, and if you take in the word life and or blood, what's the word blood? That could mean, don't get in fights over race or clan. You know, I'm of this race or this clan, I'm better than you. Don't do that. Racism is bad. Don't do it. All right? Because the word blood kind of has that connotation to it. Next commandment, or group of commandments. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. So, again, it's not Yeshua talks all the time, right? You are not to hate your brother. That's something that also John talks about a lot in his letters. You're not to hate your fellow man. You're not to hate your brother. You're not to hate your neighbor. You're to love your neighbor, right? If it says, lest you incur sin because of him. And because whenever you cause someone else to hate by your action, you're causing them to sin, right? And so, you don't want to needlessly cause others to hate you either. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people. Don't bear a grudge. Don't take vengeance on someone. But you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yahuwah. So, as Yeshua said, what are the greatest commandments, right? There's the first one, and after that, it says you shall love your neighbor as yourself is the second one, right? There you go. See, a lot of people think, oh, see, that was a New Testament thing. That's a Jesus one. They say he removed the 10 commandments, or not the 10. They say he removed all the Old Testament commandments. He removed all the commandments at Mount Sinai, right? The commandments of Moses. They like to say that, and they like to say, they say instead he only replaced it with these. And one of those ones that they say is you're to love your neighbor as yourself. They say, no, that's a new one. He took away the others and replaced it with that. But that's part of the others. And Yeshua, Jesus also says that until heaven and earth passes away, not a single part of a single letter of any of the commandments shall be done away with till heaven and earth passes away. So, no, he did not do away with the commandments, and he did not add commandments. Every single thing that Jesus, Yeshua, commands us to do is in the Old Testament commandment. Also, it's kind of funny. Those people who say you deal with the commandments, they'll also say, no, we just have to, follow the 10 commandments. Dude, the 10 commandments were given at Sinai too. Do you do it with the Sinai commandments or not? Make up your mind. Is the Bible contradicting itself? Or else are you misinterpreting it? All right? So, yeah, there it is. So, we continue on. You shall keep my statutes. That's another way of saying commandments. You shall not let your cattle breed with a different kind. So, that command right there, there's some ways to interpret that, right? Does that mean that within your cattle that you are to, not breed your dairy cows with your meat only cows? Are you like, are you only to breed your poodles with your poodles? Is that saying that a something doodle is not acceptable? That could be one way of interpreting this. I'm not saying that that's the correct interpretation, but that could be what's saying. That I can't remember dog breeds very well. Amber, could you give me the name of a breed of mutt? Are you there, Amber? Say any
Cord
mutt.
cordoodle.
What? What'd you
Cordoodle.
say?
Cordoodle.
Cordoodle. All right, there you go. Cordoodle. Corgi and a poodle. I mentioned poodle. Yeah, yeah. So that commandment right there, you shall not let your cattle breed of a different kind. That could be saying don't make mutts, like a cordoodle sin, but that might not be what's saying. What it could be saying, another interpretation of that line, um, although scientifically, the interpretation I'm about to say is not really overly possible. It is with some breeds, though. And as it could be saying, like, don't breed your cow with a horse, or don't breed your cow with a sheep. Well, I mean, scientifically, we know that that wouldn't even usually end up in a live birth. That normally the genetics wouldn't mix, and either no, no baby would come of that, or if one does, usually it'd be stillborn or would suffer from miscarriage because it'd be so deformed from the genetics being so bad off, which that is definitely probably what God's referring to there. That it is a sin, it's wicked, it's evil. I mean, it's disobeying God, because that's what sin is. And that's what wickedness is, it's disobeying God. To try and breed your cow with a sheep. That's, and, if you remember, a lot of these sins, if you do them, it leads to unhealthy things. So, yes, if you try and breed your cow with a sheep, if if the female of that mixture does become pregnant, which is very unlikely, but if it does, uh, genetically that animal is not going to live. And sometimes they do. That's how you get, for instance, mules, right? That are, is that the right word here? Right? Half horse, half donkey, right? Mule. But as you know, mules are sterile usually. Some mules are not sterile. The vast majority of them are. And that's God's way of saying, no, this is an abomination. Don't do that. You're mixing a horse and a donkey are not closely related. You mix them, it doesn't work out too well. So, because then they're sterile. It's God giving the ultimate no on that mixture. Also, it's also interesting, it's the few cases where a mule is not sterile, because there are a few. Then if you try and breed them with another mule, if you have two mules that are not sterile, which is rare, but if you have two that are not and you breed them, they will not be able to produce. But sometimes when you got a mule that's not sterile, if you breed it with a horse, the actual creature that comes out of it is a horse. Whereas if you breed it with a donkey, the creature that comes out of it is a pure donkey. Yeah, that's God giving a legitimate abomination going on there. So maybe this commandment is dealing with that, or maybe it's outlawing mutts. Hard to say. Interpret either way. Obviously, what seems to be the reality would say don't try and breed your cow with your sheep. That the reality of genetics seems to tell us that. So we move on. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed. So that that's why actually if you go to a kosher farm, a farm that farms kosher, I'm not talking animals at that point. I'm not talking about, ranch, a farm, plants. You'll notice that their crops, they'll have an area that is, corn, and then a different area that's, potatoes, and then different area that's rye, and then different area that's something else. They won't mix them together, um, because they're obeying this commandment. Do not, you know, mix your crops together. Now, of course, that has some interesting applications when we're talking about GMO, genetically modified crops. Because if they're taking a, a, some fruit or vegetable and genetically mixing it with a fruit or vegetable that wouldn't normally go with, I mean, that's breaking this commandment, isn't it? So, and you've probably read reports that some genetically modified crops, not all, some aren't even breaking this commandment, but some do. Some don't, though. I want to let you guys know. But as you've probably, looked into and know, some genetically modified crops have unhealthy side effects. Again, it's God warning us about that. So, and then the next commandment, nor shall you wear a garment of cloth made of two kinds of material. And actually, the exact words there tell us what kind of material. What they're saying there, in the exact Hebrew, is you shall not make a garment made of a mixture of wool, that would be any thread or any fabric made from animal fur, and linen. That would be any thread or fabric made of plant matter. So you're allowed to wear a garment that's made just of plant matter, and you're allowed to wear a garment made just of wool. But you're not allowed to wear a garment that's made of both together. Well, again, I got to add, we have free will. You're allowed to do anything. God's saying he'd like you not to. See, I'm recommending, if you want to be my people and of me be your God, don't do this. But you have free will. Wear what you want. But then at that point, it's between you and God. Kind of look at you and go, I said you really shouldn't do it. Right? With all these other health issues that we read about, maybe he's trying to prevent rashes or certain bacteria from growing. You could be talking about that at that point. But he's saying don't mix these things. Now, interestingly enough, another reason that he might be saying don't do that with these garments is that some of the priestly garments do include mixing wool and linen. And that's why they're called and referred to as holy garments or set apart garments. He uses those exact words. So he could be saying that only set apart religious items of fabric are allowed to mix these things. That way you don't, for your other garments, mix those things, because then you're taking what's holy and profaning it, which we already know from just today's reading. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like taking holy things and profane it. Now, because of this commandment, it's interesting that some people choose to make their tzitzit out of both linen and wool. And they said that is the only shatnez or mixed fabric garment that you're allowed to, wear as your tzitzit, your tassel. Here, let me pull out some tzitzit over here. Talking about them as well. So, tzitzit, these which God commands us to wear on the four corners of our garments. So some people make these where the white is linen, made of plant matter, like cotton, and then the blue, it's wool that has been dipped and dyed into tachelet, which tachelet is made from the blood and or crushed fermented organs of a, of a non-kosher sea creature. And so, you know, um, and so, can't eat it, but allowed to dye your fabric with it and wear that, yes. So, which maybe is another reason that shellfish is considered unkosher for eating, is because its purpose is not for eating. Clearly, its purpose might be for dyeing fabric. you know? And also, as we mentioned, also the worms and toxins and stuff. So you don't want to eat shellfish, but the again, if you want to, though, can't stop you. You have free will. But you know, but they're used for dyeing fabric, uh, and so yeah. So some say that the only shatnez that we're allowed to wear is religious garments like Ezekiel, stuff like that. Again, shatnez is just the Hebrew word for a fabric that's made out of a mixture of wool and linen. And again, wool can be any kind of animal hair, linen, any kind of plant material like cotton. So, we continue on. Uh, if a man lies sexually with a woman who is a slave assigned to another man, now again, the word slave means servant as well. The word slave is always the word servant, same word. Uh, and then also, besides that, I spoke with someone about 2 months ago and mentioned this to them, and that is, um, you know, oftentimes back in ancient times, a man would, if he cared about a woman, because remember, for a woman, it's really hard to live without being under a man back then, right? So what a man would do back then is he would take a woman who he cared about, and that I'm not saying like sexually necessarily, he'd take a woman who he cared about, and he would bring her into his house, and he'd take care of her. And then in return, she might help tie up the house and stuff, which would make her a servant. The word servant can be used for that. And so, like a orphan girl or someone or a widow. So I just want to point this extends to that too. So if a man lies sexually with a woman who is a servant assigned to another man and not yet ransomed or given her freedom, emancipated, a distinction shall be made. They shall not be put to death because she was not free. But he shall bring his compensation to Yahuwah, to the entrance of the tent of meeting or the tabernacle, a ram for a guilt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering before Yahuwah for his sin that he has committed, and he shall be forgiven for the sin that he has committed. So now this gets onto another aspect I didn't mention a moment ago, and that is, if you look at ancient Egyptian records and records in certain other ancient countries, you'll see it sometimes listed that so and so married this woman, this woman, this woman, and then it will say, and this woman who was also his daughter, and this woman who's also his daughter. Now you're like, go, wait a minute, marrying their own daughter? I want to say it's not actually, doesn't necessarily mean what in modern day terms that would mean. What an Egyptian pharaoh, and we're talking about the Bible, not Egyptian pharaohs, but I need to give this example because it helps bring some context. No, they just came out of Egypt. And so, this cultural context, cultures around. When an Egyptian pharaoh would marry their own daughter, that does not necessarily mean that they were having sex with her. What would happen in ancient Egypt, oftentimes, is that a pharaoh would, when they married their daughter, it didn't mean they were having sex with them. What that meant is that they were taking their daughter and putting them under their protection until a later date, at which point they give them to some other husband. Okay, so some of the words about servants and or wives or slaves can also include your own children, because it's children under the protection of their parents. Now, hopefully, no one here's going to argue that parents should not protect their children. All right. So, if we look at this commandment that I just read, so any woman who is under the care of someone else who has greater means than them, be it your daughter who's under your care or some other woman who you have vowed to take care of. So it's saying if a man, some other man, has sex with a woman who is under the care of someone else, and they're not talking about rape here, they're talking about in mutual sex, one that's an agreed upon sex. However, because this woman is under the care of this other person, she's not free to have sex with this random guy. So I mean, if a 16-year-old or a 14-year-old man has sex with a 14-year-old girl who's under the care of someone else, an adopted daughter or his real daughter, right? And if the girl consented, if it wasn't rape, it says that the man who had sex with her is not to be put to death. It was consensual, it wasn't rape. However, it says that he shall bring his compensation to the Almighty, because he's still wrong, because this girl was not free to do that. She was under the protection of someone else. This guy went about the wrong way. He fornicated with her. He had sex with her outside marriage. He's wronged. He's sinned. He's to bring his compensation to God to the entrance of the tabernacle. And then, it says, what one's was. And then once the priest has done that, then the person shall be forgiven for the sin that he has committed. So, it's saying, oh, okay, you don't deserve to be killed or anything for this, but fornication is not acceptable. Sex outside of marriage, when the woman has not been given to you, not okay. So that's an anti-fornication commandment. So I had to go into all that explanation to explain what was going on there. Anti-fornication commandment. Next commandment. When you come into the land and plant any kind of tree for food, then you shall regard its fruit as forbidden. And the actual Hebrew word here is you shall regard its fruit as uncircumcised. And I'll get more into why it uses that word in a moment. 3 years it shall be forbidden to you. It must not be eaten. And in the 4th year, all its fruit shall be holy or set apart, an offering of praise to Yahuwah. You should give it all to God in the temple. Back then when the temple stood, obviously. But in the 5th year, you may eat of its fruit to increase its yield for you. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. So, it's not that you're never to eat the fruit of the plant. You eventually will eat it, but saying for the first 3 years after you plant a fruit tree, you are to not harvest its first 3 years worth of food, that they are considered uncircumcised. So, if you think about with an infant boy, right? After the 8th day, they are to be circumcised. And they're to be, on that same day that they're circumcised, that child is dedicated to the Almighty, because that's what circumcision is about. Circumcision is the sign of your covenant to the Almighty. He says that in Genesis, right? And he then says in Deuteronomy, and then in Ezekiel, and then in the New Testament, in all those books, including Deuteronomy, he says you're to circumcise not just your flesh, but also circumcise your heart. Yes, that is in Deuteronomy. It's not a New Testament thing. It's in the first 5 books of the Bible, and it's also in the later books of the Old Testament. It's an Old Testament thing as well. So, anyway, see, nothing new in the New Testament. The renewed testament, renewed witness. It's not, anything new. So, whenever something, the child, you don't circumcise that boy on the first few days that he's born. You wait till the 8th day, wait for a particular time, and you circumcise him. Then you dedicate him to the Almighty, make him holy, set apart. Right? So here it's with the plants, it is with the fruit of the fruit trees, right? It's saying for the first 3 years, that fruit is to be considered uncircumcised. Okay? And you're not to eat it. Then after that, on the 4th year, you are to pick the fruit, but all the fruit that you pick is to be given as first fruit offerings to the Almighty for that year. You're always supposed to take the first fruit of the harvest and the best of the first fruit of the harvest, and you're supposed to always dedicate that every year to God. But the 4th year, all of that fruit is the first fruit for the whole year. You're not to eat any of it. You're not to sell any of it. That's to go to God. So then, you see that circumcision thing, child being dedicated to God, the fruit, these trees are dedicated to God. Then it says on the 5th year that then it says on the 5th year, you are to harvest it, sell it, eat it for yourself, do whatever you want with the fruit. And it says, because you have followed God, because you listened to him and did not eat of it for the first 3 years, and he dedicated all of it for the 4th year to him, that whenever you harvest from it that 5th year, that its yield of the next year, the fruit it produced for next year, will vastly increase. And so, and we know this, science also proves this, in that whenever you pick, some of the fruit, because again, you're supposed to leave a little for the orphan and for the widow and for the poor and for the foreigner who reside amongst you. But whenever you harvest some of the fruit, science tells us that the plant always produces vastly more fruit the next year. That's what's on it. It will increase its yield. But see, if you disobey God, then that's when you're going to get famine, when the tree isn't producing properly. And science has also proven that, if you start harvesting all of the fruit, all of it, not leaving any, starting in the first year and stuff, that plant will actually not produce so well, and it might actually die and might get diseases and stuff. So it's best to listen to God. He then signifies that these are all commandments by saying, I am Yahuwah your Elohim. You shall not eat any flesh with the blood in it. We read that last week too, right? So there, it's being resaid again. You shall not interpret omens or tell fortune. So an interesting thing here that I mentioned in one of our other studies with Josh and stuff, like 2 months ago, is that the word omen does not have the meaning that people think it means. The word omen, if you actually read ancient historical documents, has a very specific meaning. And the actual correct meaning of the word omen is interpreting the meaning of birds. Yeah, kind of interesting, huh? So, by the way, Amber, just give Kayla the link so that she can come in if she wants to come in. Okay? You have the link in your chat. I send it to you in Facebook. I didn't mean to interrupt. I didn't want to interrupt, but you were causing Kayla to get so confused. It's like, just give her the link. If she wants to come, she'll come. If she doesn't want to come, she won't come. You know? I was trying to ignore it and just continue on, but you were just confusing the poor girl. You were putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. This kid is blind. Just give her the link. Yeah. So I will continue with what I was saying here. So, where was I? So omen. So yeah, people are like, what? Interpreting birds. So thankfully we're Goths here, right? So we know some Goth sayings and poems and Goth stories. So actually, many of us are actually already aware of a nursery rhyme that mentions about what omens are. And that is this: one crow, sorrow; two crows, joy; three crows, for a girl; four crows, for a boy; and so on and so forth. That's a famous nursery rhyme, famous amongst Goths. So that's actually um, a wedding omen there, and that is if on your wedding day, if you see one crow flying, it means that your marriage is going to be full of sorrow. If you see two crows, then your marriage will be full of joy. Three crows, your first child is going to be a girl. Four crows, your first child is going to be a boy. So that's what that nursery rhyme is actually about. And that is omens. That is looking at a bird and interpreting it to be talking about a sign for the future. And that was really common in pagan cultures, especially in Greek culture. Now, this that we're reading right here, this is long before Greek culture. So it was also common in the Egyptian cultures, common amongst pagan cultures. They would see a bird or a group of birds flying, and what type of bird and how many were flying together, they would give a different interpretation. By the way, of course, if you see a bunch of vultures circling around, something's dead. That was what it meant. And yeah, that is what that normally means. But yes, so now you know what an omen is. It's a way of telling your future by looking at birds. Interesting enough, the actual English word omen comes from the Greek word for bird. If you want to know how to say the word bird in ancient Greek, it's the word omen. It just means birds. That's all it means. That's literally what the word omen means. It just means birds. So, getting back into that, I'm actually going to replace the word omen with birds, and you'll see it works fine. You shall not eat any flesh with blood in it. You shall not interpret birds. See, interpret birds. You shall not interpret birds or tell fortunes. You shall not round off. So, so that was one right there. Don't interpret birds or tell fortunes. Right? Next one. You shall not round off the hair on your temples. And then the second part of the afterward, or I'll take that separately. But so, what is the hair at your temples? Side of your head, right? So, what does round off mean? That means trim, right? So, you're not to trim the hair on the side of your head. There's a few ways that people interpret this. Some say it means that you are to not cut your hair. However, others note that other commandments talk about how Nazarenes uh, or Nazarites. Nazarites are people who vow, a Nazarite vow to God, that they, during the course of their vow, are not going to cut their hair. And then actually says when their vow ends, or if they break their vow, they then need to shave their head. So then that tells us that this command is possibly not saying that you would never cut your hair. So okay, then it's talking about something about trimming your hair. So then the other way that this be taken is, okay, let's look at the exact words. You shall not round or trim off the hair on your temples. That's right here. So that's why, if you look at some very observant Jews, you'll see that even if they have short hair, if all the rest of their hair is cut short, that they will often have little things of hair right here. They normally curl them just to look fancy, I guess. Well, and also make them shorter and more easier to deal with. I just did a terrible job of curling, but they'll tight little ringlets on both sides. Mine isn't as tight as it should be. So they'll do tight little ringlets right here and leave the rest of their hair short. I'm talking Jewish men. Jewish men. And that is them following this commandment. They are not, remember, we have free will, right? If you don't want to follow this commandment, you cut all the hair there, right? For those who try to follow this commandment, because God gave it, so they want to follow, those men leave at least the hair on the temples like this. Now, some men who follow this command, they wear them in front like this. Others put them in the back so that you can't see them. Clearly, I put mine in the back. Right? So there you go. But still, I don't trim them. Right? Why don't I trim? Because God says no. So I don't. Right? So, by the way, the Hebrew word for that is called peyot. Peyot translates curls. So, yeah, peyot. That's the name of the curls. So, then moving on to the next part of that commandment, it says, or mar, that means shave, or mar the edges of your beard. So you're not to trim the edges of your beard. So God recommends that we don't cut the hair at the temple of our head, or maybe not cut all of our hair at all, but to grow our hair long, to be interpreted both ways. And we're not to trim our beards. So, you see, my beard is not trimmed. Right? Again, you can do whatever you want. You have free will. Want to trim your beard? That's between you and God. God says don't do it, so I don't. Right? So, now, interesting enough, if you look at some older pictures of me, I have in the past occasionally trimmed this part and trimmed the upper part of this part, but I always left this part long. Why? Easy. I was not trimming the corners of my face. I was still trying to technically follow the commandment. See, I was not trimming the corners of my. That's what it says. This is what I was doing. I wasn't trimming the corner. I was just trimming the upper part. Again, it's like with the hair. Some people, shave or cut short all the rest and just leave these, right? So I was trimming this part and this part of my beard, but I was leaving the corners. So there's ways to try and skirt it a little. So anyway, so that's the commandment there. So then moving on to the next commandment, you shall not make any cuts on your body for the dead, or tattoo yourselves. I am Yahuwah. Now again, you have free will. You have tattoos. Well, first off, you have tattoos and you didn't know about this commandment, not your fault. You're ignorant, you didn't know. But at the same time, if you like having tattoos and you're going to do it anyway, like, for instance, the guy who co-leads this group with me, Joshua, he has a lot of tattoos and he gets new tattoos all the time. He knows about this commandment. I've had that discussion with him. He chooses not to follow it. He has free will, right? So that's free will. He's gonna do it. So if you like tattoos and you're trying to get a new one tomorrow, I have no control over you. You gotta do what you gotta do. It's between you and God. I'm not gonna judge you. Um, you know, if you ask me what does God say about it, oh, he says this. But you have free will. You're gonna do what you want to do. So, uh, yeah, he says, do not tattoo yourselves. So you'll notice I don't have any tattoos. Again, I try to follow everything he says. And then you'll notice it says, do not cut yourself or do tattoos for the dead. Now that cut yourself, ooh, there's some ways to interpret that. And some people also put the dead part as applying to the tattoos. So some interpretations I've heard this. Some interpretations I've heard is that it's not banning you from getting tattoos. It's just banning you from getting tattoos commemorating the dead. Now, of course, there's a lot of people get tattoos commemorating the dead, don't they? So with that interpretation, the whole tattoo for your grandmother or for your mother or for your child that died at the age of 3 of spina bifida or whatever, or your child that died at the age of 16 in a car accident. A lot of people get tattoos of that stuff, or tattoo of the footprints of their baby, right? A lot of people get that. Now your baby's still alive. I guess that can screw around, but a lot of people get tattoos for the dead, to commemorate the dead. But okay, fine. Then if you want to take that word for the dead, which is somewhere in that commandment, right? If you want to apply tattoos, well, a lot of people break into that view. Again, that's between them and God, right? Yeah. So, but that word specifically for the dead comes after the cuts. So that might not apply. It might be with the tattoos. It might be any tattoo. So, but there's some wiggle room there. Maybe it's just about tattoos commemorating the dead. Then the cuts part. What is the definition of a cut? Is the question there. And okay, fine. If you want to stick for the dead on the tattoo one, okay, so then is it you're just not to purposely cut yourself in general, or just purposely cut yourself for the dead? It can go either way. So some interpretations of that is to not, like do self-mutilation. They say that a lot of the pagan cults back then would do a lot of the pagan cults would do mutilating themselves, like do little slits in themselves, and also put like tattoo ink into the slits, and that's another way of making a tattoo. You don't actually have to use a needle to do a tattoo. You cut yourself and rub ink or powders, powdered pigments, powdered dyes into your cut. Scarification, kind of stuff. That maybe it's this commandment is about those pagan cultures who would do that to commemorate a dead loved one. And maybe it was that. And of course, people do colored ink scarifications these days too. Right? What's new is old. What's old is new again. So it could just be talking about that. Be talking about those pagan rituals. Don't do those pagan rituals. That's one interpretation. Uh, it could also be saying don't do self-harm. It's God saying, we understand life is hard, emotions are hard, but self-harm, killing oneself on purpose, out of grief, is not healthy. There's healthier ways to deal with grief and loss and other stresses. Killing yourself is not the most healthy way to deal with that. So it could be God saying to us, self-harm is unhealthy, and we need to try and not release our emotions through self-harm. So that's another interpretation of that commandment. Another interpretation is it could be talking about piercing. Do not cut yourself unintentionally on purpose, right? So do not. Now, if you're working in a field or cutting something and you accidentally pierce yourself, that's an accident. That was not intentional. Let's talk about intentional, right? If you accidentally stab your hand while cutting something. That's not intentional. That wasn't intended. So it could be saying don't get piercing. That's not an interpretation of that passage. But it could also be talking about, as I said, the ritual for the dead, or it could be talking about self-mutilation. So don't think that I'm saying that piercings are bad, especially since there are other commandments where God specifically says, and we read this a few weeks ago, that if you're a servant for someone and you like working for them, you like living with them and having them provide all your needs in exchange for you working for them, that you're a tell this person, no, I like working with you. I want to work with you for the rest of my life. And then God commands you, it's a commandment, to pierce that person through their ear. Well, if God's command you to pierce someone, piercing must be okay, right? So that's the thing that argues against the interpretation that this is saying don't get piercing. Because there are other commands where God specifically tells you to pierce people. However, then our people say, oh, but being a servant of someone for your entire life was considered a shameful thing, and that if you wanted to, okay, then you're to be pierced. But being pierced was actually a sign that you were shamed, that you were not independent. And so the appeal will interpret that as saying that means you're not to be a servant of someone else your entire life, which then that would say that getting piercings is shameful and you're not to get piercings. So then that just turned around that, oh, maybe this is talking about piercings in general. Hard to say. I'm giving all the interpretations. I'm not saying one interpretation is more right than the other. These are all possible interpretations of that passage. Now me personally, if you check my ears, I don't have any piercing. You know, um, I don't have pierced ears. I don't have a pierced nose. So I don't get piercings myself. If someone else wants to get piercings, they might very well be allowed to. This commandment is probably not talking about piercing, in general. So another sign that this commandment is probably not talking about piercings in general is that there's other places in the Bible where it talks about women having, pierced ears and having earrings. So, but then I've heard other people interpret it as, oh, but oftentimes when it talks about earrings, it's associating them with pagan vanities. Okay, so then they're saying piercings are bad at that point. But then look at, like in Song of Solomon, the guy says, I'm going to make earrings for you. Well, maybe they were clip-on. True, there were clip-on earrings back then, but maybe they weren't. Maybe they were pierced. So I just want to give all that if someone says to you, getting piercings is absolutely a sin, you can tell them that's not necessarily true. That line, especially if they're using this verse, this commandment, which oftentimes they do. People who tell you piercings are sin is a sin will oftentimes be talking about this commandment. No, it might be a sin, but it might not be. It might be perfectly fine. Tattoos, on the other hand, probably a sin, especially if they're tattooed for the dead. But again, maybe it's just a particular pagan ritual regarding tattoos. That's hard to say. To me, the tattoo one seems a lot more firm. I would not recommend someone get a tattoo. Of course, I don't recommend people get piercings either. But tattoo, probably a sin. But depends. It might be a specific tattoo. So that is those commandments right there regarding tattoos and cutting oneself on purpose. I wanted to mention it because it's related. Surgery. Now, if you need a surgery to save your life or to fix a medical condition, so if you need to be pierced or cut open for a medical reason, that is not violating that commandment about don't cut yourself. Surgery is allowed. So don't worry. Some, like the denominations, I believe it's called Christian Science. Oh, I need a drink. Christian Science people, they won't get surgeries. They refuse to. They say the Bible says don't get surgery. No, that's again, that's a misinterpretation of things. You're allowed to get surgery. It's okay. But but they have to be for real conditions that are, you know, harmful. So if you need your appendix taken out, get that surgery, get the appendix taken out, right? You need your tonsils taken out, get them out, right? If you need some other thing like that's allowed. Okay. However, oh, also if you're like disfigured in a car accident or burn, yeah, go ahead, get you can get reconstructive surgery. If you've bad burns and you replace the skin there, get if you've had your nose torn off and you need to, you know, have where they stick the balloon in your face, stretch out your skin here, and then they make you a new nose. That's okay. That's allowed. That's fine. However, the don't cut yourself thing, I would say that is saying don't get needless surgery. So that is to say, if you go, oh, my lips are too thin, I want them to be bigger. Again, you have free will. You can do what you want. You can get a collagen injection if you want. I would interpret this passage as saying, God made you perfect. God loves you. God designed you. Your lips are fine. Don't let society tell you that your lips are too thin. Your lips are beautiful. You know, Same thing if you have, A or B cup breasts. Don't let society tell you, oh no, you gotta have D's. You have to have D cup breasts. No, God designed your breast. Now, if you have breast cancer and you have a mastectomy, it's okay to get reconstructive surgery to get new breasts. That's fine. You've been disfigured. That's okay. But if God gave you A cups or B cups, you're beautiful and you're fine. Don't let society pressure you and tell you you're ugly. This is God telling you, don't fall into that pressure. God designed you. You're perfect. You're beautiful. Okay? Or butt implants, cheek implants, whatever, right? You're fine. God loves you. He made you perfect. Don't listen to society. You're not to be like them. You're not to be worldly, right? You're not to be of the flesh. You're to be of the spirit. You're to be set apart. To be different. So don't I do interpret this as God saying, don't get needless cosmetic surgeries. Now, here's where it can get interesting and somewhat offensive to some modern day audiences. And that is, what's another type of modern day surgery that some people get? Gender reassignment surgery, right? That again is someone saying, I'm not happy being a boy or I'm not happy being a girl. So I'm going to change that. God made me a boy or a girl, but I think God made a mistake and I don't like it. So I'm going to change it. Whoa, whoa, whoa. God designed you perfect. God loves you. If He made you a boy, you're a boy. If He made you a girl, you're a girl. If He made you an in between, some people are born that way. If He made you intersex, you're intersex. It's okay. Yeah, some people are born with male and female admixtures in them. I can't deny it. That's a reality. God made you the way you're meant to be. Right? Some people are eunuchs from birth, is how Paul, mentions stuff, right? So, um, so look, trying to say, I'm not trying to say anything. It's not my place. I'm trying to say what God is saying. I'm not trying to say anything against um, transgendered people. I'm not, you know, I, I'm not. I don't have any hatred at all or any dislike at all for transgender people. But if you ask me what I think God is saying, He's saying that He loves you and you're already beautiful as you are. You don't need to change. All right. So I don't recommend gender reassignment surgery. I have a lot of friends who've had reassignment surgery. I have a lot of trans friends. I'm not bad mouthing them. I'm not saying anything against them. They have free will. If they want to disobey God and get gender reassignment surgery, that's between them and God. I'm not to judge them. Now, if they ask me, what does God say about it? I'm going to tell them what I think He's saying about it. Again, kind yourself can be interpreted so many ways. But and there's other lines about transgenderism or places in the Bible. If they ask me what God says, I'll tell them. But I have lots of trans friends, and I love them. Wonderful people. Uh, you know, um, we're to love our brother. Said earlier, right? So I love my trans friends. But if they ask me what God says about transgenderism, I'm going to tell them. And by the way, of course, one of the other commandments I'm referring to is a man shall not, dress as a woman, and a woman shall not dress as a man. So obviously, what God says, um, but they have free will. They're going to do what they want. So now we're going to move on from that. I just need to go into that other interpretation about surgeries. How purposely killing yourself would include needless surgery. So I'm thinking, don't do needless surgeries. You're already beautiful the way He made you. I think that's a beautiful message. That's why I like to remember to say it. So, do not profane your daughter by making her a prostitute, lest the land fall into prostitution and the land become full of depravity. So, if you're looking for a commandment saying, don't do prostitution, there you go. Now, that being said, that again could be interpreted a different way too. This might not be banning all prostitution. It might be banning all prostitution. That's definitely one interpretation. And that might be the correct interpretation. There is another way to interpret it. Did it say don't prostitute yourself? Well, let's see it. Do not profane your daughter by making her a prostitute. Okay. Don't prostitute your own children. Don't pimp out your own children. That it's definitely saying. So, pimping out your own children, taking your sons and daughters and turning them into sex slaves, where you get the money from that, you're benefiting from people having sex with your children, that's a big no-no. That is a sin. There's no denying that it said that. Because it says, do not profane your daughter by making her a prostitute, lest the land fall into prostitution and the land become full of depravity. So that's not necessarily banning all prostitution. It's definitely banning prostituting your children. That's definite. So if you want to follow God, again, you have free will. If you want to prostitute your children, that's between you and God. But God says, don't do it. Or then your land will be, everyone will want to do it at that point. They'll want to take advantage of their children, and your land will be full of prostitutes. And that's also full of idolatry at that point, because prostitution is always tied into idolatry. So, definitely, God says, don't prostitute your children. Maybe don't do prostitution at all, but a little bit of interpretation leeway there. Prostitution might be banned. Maybe prostitution is a sin, maybe not. Prostituting your children absolutely is a sin. So there you go. Again, people have free will, though. They can sin if they choose to. So. Then it says, you shall keep my Sabbaths, and reverence or honor my sanctuary. I am Yahuwah. So he just said earlier, Sam reading earlier today, you shall honor my Sabbaths. And he's saying it again. It says it a lot throughout the Bible. That's one of the most constantly repeated commandments. Now, again, Sabbaths means it's high holy days. So it could be every Saturday plus, Passover, Yom HaVakirim, Shavuot, Sukkot, uh, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Shemini Azaret, it's holy days. The holidays, which is already listed a few times, is going to list them in the future. So if you missed them in our previous readings, it's fine. We'll get them in future readings. Honor his holy days, right? And honor his sanctuary, which at this point was the Mishkan, it was the tabernacle. So, but then later the temple. Then the ends that come out, I'm Yahuwah. Then he goes on, do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Now, there's actually, just like how omens, people don't really know what an omen is, right? People don't know what a medium is. People think a fortune teller. No, fortune teller, he said earlier, don't go to fortune tellers. That was right after the word omens. So that tells you a medium is not the same as a fortune teller. You think they are, you're wrong. But a medium was, and is someone who during a seance has a slime come out of their mouth. That is called ectoplasm, by the way. As an ectoplasm come out of their mouth and form into the face of a ghost of a loved one. And then that ectoplasmic being tells you things, talks to you. That is what a medium was. A medium was a person whose body was full of ectoplasm, and through that ectoplasm, a ghost would come out of their mouth and speak to you. That's a medium. Not the same as a fortune teller. A fortune teller tells your fortune. A medium is someone who ghosts talk through them to you. They are the medium, the telephone that connects you to a dead one. So don't go to people. This command is saying, no, it earlier said don't go to fortune tellers. Now it's saying don't go to people who tell you that they're talking to your dead loved ones and that they have a message to you from your dead loved ones. Don't do that, is what this is saying. That's a medium. That's what a medium is. So I'm sure you've seen some famous ones on TV. John Edwards is a famous medium, right? That's a man who, people go to him and they'll say, your grandma, your aunt is talking to him and gives you advice from them. That's a medium. The Bible says, don't go to them. Don't get fooled by them. Don't get swindled by them or fortune tellers or people who interpret birds, right? Omens. And then after mediums, now you know what a medium is. It says, or necromancers. A necromancer is someone who can bring back the dead or control the dead. Don't go as someone to try and get your dead loved one resurrected. Necromancer could also be someone who kills people. Don't go to an assassin and have them kill someone for you. Do not seek them out and so make yourselves unclean by them. If you pay them to sin for you by doing their trade, you're encouraging them to do their trade, you're encouraging them to sin. Don't do that. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. So that's how you know it's a commandment. You shall stand up before the gray head. Stand up means honor or respect. Before the gray head or the elderly, and honor the face of an old man. And you shall fear or honor and respect your Elohim, your God. I'm Yahuwah. When a stranger sojourns, so whenever a foreigner is residing amongst you, some Bibles alien, stranger, alien. It just means a foreigner. So, and sojourner usually means a foreigner anyway, because a sojourner means a traveler. So, some, coming through. So, when a stranger sojourns, so when an alien resides amongst you, with you in your land, it says, with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, which it also said last week in the half Torah section, but now it's saying in the Torah section. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers or foreigners in the land of Egypt. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. By the way, you can't get around this by saying, well, that was the Jews. I was never a foreigner in Egypt. If you've taken on Yahuwah Elohim to be your God, you're grafted into Israel, which means, yes, you were a foreigner in Egypt. That's what, the holiday almost a month ago, Pesach was all about, that we are foreigners who were in Egypt, who were persecuted and suffered slavery. We've all been slaves to sin. We've all been under bondage. We've all sinned and disobeyed God. We've all, at times in our life, been foreign to his word. We've all been foreign. So, you're to treat them as you would your native born. Said it last week, says it here. It also said it like a month ago. We've read in a lot of places, you are to not wrong the foreigner who is residing in your land. It's not saying about legally, or illegally. It's just saying who's residing in your land. Doesn't matter how they got there. Doesn't matter if they have permission to be there or not. You're not to wrong them. You are to treat them as you would your native born. Verse 34, right here. All right. So I didn't write it. Don't think I'm being political. God wrote it. All right. Doesn't matter how you interpret it. But that one is always going to come up meaning that. So don't mistreat foreigners. If you do, you have free will. You can do what you want. If you want to mistreat a foreigner, go ahead. Be my guest. God says, please don't. That's all. So I don't recommend that you do. But you know what? You want to disobey God? Between you and God. Okay? So, then he says, I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. So it's a commandment. You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measures of length or weight or quantity. You shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah. Ephah was 3/5 of a bushel or 22 liters, and a just hin. A hen or a hind was about 4 quarts or 1 gallon or 3.5 liters. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And you shall observe all my statutes and all my rules and do them. I am Yahuwah. So, again, there he's saying, don't wrong people when you're selling things to people. Don't fix your scales so that they give a wrong weight or wrong measurement. Don't claim, oh, this tells me if this is a 5 ounces, whenever really it's, telling you if it's 3, because then you're robbing them of 2 ounces, right? Don't do that. Don't mistreat people. Don't mistreat your workers. And if you are selling things, don't sell them less than what they paid for, right? God's looking out for us, right? Do not, steal from people. Don't rob them. Don't mistreat them. Don't be unjust in your measurements and weights. So I actually had to use this commandment once as an excuse to quit a job a few years ago. I was working as a medical taxi cab driver, and between Monday and Friday, I worked 60 hours, and I got my paycheck. And they gave us a paycheck every week. Got my paycheck, 60 hours just between Monday and Friday. A lot of hours, right? You know how much I got paid? $115. That is like well below minimum wage, right? 60 hours, $115. They're not paying their workers a living wage, which was last week's commandment. They are mistreating their worker, not giving what they're due. Commandment earlier that we read today. And, that payment scale, they weren't using proper weights and balances for that, were they? Yep, sorry, I have to quit. The amount you're paying me is a violation of my religion. That's what I told them, and I quit. That's literally the excuse I gave. It's true. It's a violation of my religion for me to work there. It's against my religion. They weren't paying their workers properly, so I quit. Yeah, truth. So stand up for yourselves. Make sure they're not wronging you. Make sure that you're getting paid proper living wages. And when you buy stuff, make sure that they're proper weights and measurements and they're not giving you less than what you paid for. That's you doing your religious duty. Okay? Don't let them wrong you. Again, they have free will. They can wrong you if they wish, but they really shouldn't. All right, anyway, we move forward. Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, say to the people of Israel, any one of the people of Israel, or the strangers who sojourn in Israel, who gives any of his children to Moloch. Remember, we talked about Moloch last week, the whole abortion topic and the whole putting your children to the fires of Moloch. Remember that last week? So any of them who gives any of his children to Moloch shall surely be put to death. The people of the land, or remember, put to death is also cut off. So be cut off from God. You shall not receive salvation. What's in it? Because the actual Hebrew word put to death is cut off. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. So put to death. But the actual word put to death is cut off. I myself will set my face against that man, and God himself will curse that man or that human, and will cut him off from among his people, because he has given one of his children to Moloch, to make my sanctuary unclean and to profane my holy name. So, last week we talked about how that could be interpreted a few ways as a parent walking their child between two bonfires that represent them dedicating their child to Moloch, or it could have been interpreted as a parent physically offering their child as a burnt offering to Moloch, killing their child. It could be interpreted either of those ways. I talked at length about that last week. And I mentioned about how Moloch was the Canaanite god of lordship, of wanting more power, wanting to be an Elohim, wanting to be a mighty one, and have more power or either over others or over your own life. So then one way of interpreting it, which I said last week, was don't sacrifice or kill your children because you want more control over your own life. That an abortion with that as your reason is absolutely a sin. That is idol worship. That's worshiping Moloch. It's instead of being humble, it's you wanting to be exalted and you feeling that your life is more important than other people, or that your ability to do what you want is more important than a baby. So that seemed to have been one way of interpreting the Moloch commandment last week. There are other interpretations. I went more into that last week. And we again have that same commandment this week as well. Thus lead 2 to 3 witnesses. Remember, everything in the Bible is repeated at least 2 or 3 times because the Bible says that things are proven by 2 or 3 witnesses. So don't sacrifice your children to Moloch. Could be don't dedicate your children to Moloch. Could be don't murder your children to Moloch. Or it could be don't kill your children because you want more control over your own life. Each of those interpretations might be correct, or maybe just one of those is correct. But those are possible interpretations of that passage. So, and if the people of the land do at all close their eyes to that man when he gives one of his children to Moloch, and do not put him to death, or do not come off, then I will set my face against that man and against his clan, and will cut them off from among their people, him and all who follow him in whoring after Moloch. Again, whoring, that's another way of saying idol worship, or following false wisdoms or following false teachings. God uses the word whoring to represent that. So, so if anyone in the land supports that guy and has sacrificed his child to Moloch, which again could interpret it a few different ways, that person should also be cut off, them and their whole clan. Because of the whoring after Moloch, or following the wisdom of Moloch. And again, that just might be talking about some ritual where a parent walks their child between two bonfires and dedicates them to Moloch instead of to Yahuwah. There's various ways of interpreting that. Could be, something their 8-day-old male and or female child and of the firstborn, and actually putting it in a fire and roasting it to Moloch. Or you can interpret it as a abortion because you want more control of your life. It's not necessarily some of those might be misinterpretation. I'm giving all the interpretations, and so there they are. So, moving on from Moloch, which we talked extensively about last week, and now today. If a person turns to mediums and necromancers, whoring after them. See, the second one, this came so quick, didn't it? I will set my face against that person, or it means I will curse you. I will come off from among his people. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, or set apart. For I am Yahuwah, your Elohim. Keep my statutes and do them. I am Yahuwah, who sanctifies you, or who makes you holy, who sets you apart. For anyone who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Again, curses does not necessarily mean saying a bad word. That's not a curse in this instance. Means either calling for evil to be done up to them, or else what it can also mean here is if you are causing hardship. If you look at Proverbs, it says that a child who disobeys God curses their parents. That's what it says in Proverbs. If you are disobeying God and making your life harder, you are being a curse to your parents. They love you. They don't want you to make your life harder. If you are making your and or their life harder on purpose and being a snot-nosed brat, you are cursing your parents. You are, Another way of interpreting that is, of course, if you are causing your parents to sin, knowingly and intentionally causing your parents to sin, you are also cursing them as well, because you're bringing the curse upon them. So don't, curse your mother or father. It's not just talking about, saying, hey, screw you. That's not what it's talking about. Curse is a far broader term, and it's not talking about curse words there. So, for anyone who curses his father or his mother, and if you notice, before it said mother and father, not saying father and mother again. The Bible does that switcheroo all the time. It's telling you that they're both, equal. So, for anyone who curses his mother or his father shall surely be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother. His blood is upon him. So, If a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death or cut off. If a man lies, by the way, if you notice, this is not just the one, it's both. If a man lies to his father's wife, and we know from last week's reading, be it his mother or a woman who his father has later married, if a man lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. That's a direct quote from last week. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, the wife of his son, and that's again a direct quote from last week. Both of them shall surely be put to death. They have committed perversions. Their blood is upon them. If a man lies with a male as with a woman, that was last week also, direct quote from last week. Both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death or cut off. Their blood is upon them. Now, I said it last week. I gotta say it again. I gotta make it clear. The word that's used there, and that could have another meaning. I mentioned it last week. Gotta go into it, at least in brief this week. It could be saying if an older man has sex with a young boy. That's another way of interpreting it. So it could, instead of talking about homosexuality in general, which it might be talking about, instead it could be talking about what's called pediatry, which is a form of pedophilia. Could be saying an adult man in his 30s or 40s, is not to have sex with a 12-year-old boy. Especially if that man is a high-ranking man, like, for instance, a general in an army, and if that little boy is planning on joining the army and be under him and be favored and become a future general, which, again, that could also be banning, could possibly be interpreted as banning having sex with someone that you have much greater power over them. Like, as I said last week, if a manager has sex with an employee who's below them, this could also be banning that as well. So those are possible ways of interpreting this text. It could be interpreted those ways. Now, as I said last week, though, I've looked at the words in Hebrew. Both of the words for male are the same Hebrew word, which just means male. So it's probably banning men having sex with men, but there are those other interpretations, so I have to say them. Because if I don't say them, someone's going to get upset and make a comment of, well, it could actually mean, yes, I know it can mean those things. So so there. I have to get into it and say what all it can mean. There. To be fair, it could be banning older men having sex with little boys. But regardless to what it's banning, you have free will. You want to have sex with, you want to be a man, have sex with another man. You want to be a man, have sex with a little boy. You can do it. It doesn't make it right. You're still sinning. You're still doing what God does not want you to do. What God says is unhealthy for you and for others. But if you want to do it, you have free will. You can do it. So don't think I'm telling you you can't do this. No, you can do it. It might not be right to do it, or it might be unhealthy to do it. But you can do it. You have free will. So, you want to have sex with another man? That's between you and God. You want to have sex with little boys? That's between you and God. God's your judge. But if you want to ask me, what does God say about it? I'll tell you what he's going to say about it. So, moving on from that, where was I? Okay. Yeah, it's abomination and shall be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man takes a woman and her mother also, this is also word for word from last week, it is depravity. He and they shall be burned with fire, that there may be no depravity among you. So as I said last week, you sometimes hear men go, "Ooh, I'd like to get with a mother and her daughter." Nope, that's a sin. Again, you have free will. If you want to have sex with a woman and her daughter, you have free will, but you're disobeying God at that point. He says don't, says it's depravity, So, I have ex-girlfriends. Some of my ex-girlfriends have daughters who are in their teens now. If I had sex with those women, God says don't have sex with their daughters. That is depravity, so don't do it. If you had sex with someone, don't also have sex with their children. It's God's recommendation. There's all of its recommendations because you have free will. So, right. If a man lies with an animal, this is again was said word for word last week, he shall surely be put to death, and you shall kill the animal. Now, some people like to get all up in arms with us. What'd the animal do? Don't kill the animal. Here's the reason it says you must kill the animal. And science can back this up. If a human has sex with an animal, they have corrupted that animal. It made that more clear in last week's reading. If a person has sex with an animal, that animal is far more likely to try and have sex with people or try and rape people who don't want to have sex with it in the future. If you have sex with a dog, that dog is more likely to try and have sex with other people in the future. If you have sex with a horse or a cow, that horse, I know it's, look, I didn't write the Bible. Don't blame me. Okay? But if you had sex with a horse or a cow, that horse or a cow is more likely to try and have sex with and maybe even kill a person who doesn't want to have sex with it in the future. So that animal has been corrupted. Okay? That animal has been perverted. So, yes, if a human has sex with an animal, you have to kill that animal. That's a fact. Look into modern day science research on that, they'll tell you gotta kill. God says you gotta kill him too. It's abominable. And that person's corrupted that animal and corrupted themselves. So, ew. Now, again, you have free will. You want to have sex with sheep? That's between you and God. But I don't recommend having sex with sheep. A little bit of interesting things here. Did you know that? I think I said this last week. Did you know that science have done genetic researches on the genomes of syphilis? And they found that humans got syphilis by a human ancestor having sex with a monkey or a chimp. So the disease syphilis came because some human decided to have sex with a chimp. Disgusting, right? I mentioned before with the whole what animals you should eat and what you shouldn't. That God, I said the word should because you have free will. God said don't eat bats. You know how COVID-19 got started? China was eating bat meat, and they caught this, cold. That's what COVID is. It's a cold. It's related to the cold. It's a very bad, deadly cold. They got it from the bat of it. God said, don't eat bat. AIDS. Now, AIDS happened. What is this? In Africa, one of the meats that is commonly eaten is called bushmeat, and it's monkeys and chimps. Now, chimps and monkeys, they have simian immunodeficiency virus, SIV. Now, so people go and buy butchered monkey meat to eat. So there are butchers who are called bushmeat butchers who, for a living, will butcher native African wildlife, and that includes monkeys and chimps. And what is this butcher? They've found this out now. This is the origin of AIDS. A bushmeat butcher was cutting up monkey meat or chimp meat I don't know which it was, monkey or chimp, but is cutting up some meat, and he accidentally cut his finger. And some of the simian blood mixed into his blood. And normally, SIV, simian immunodeficiency virus, doesn't really affect humans too much. You might feel sick like a cold or something, but usually within about 10 days, your body will completely flush it out and you'll be fine. It's happened throughout history, many times in Africa. It happens all the time. But what happened was that this person who was butchering monkey meat, which is not kosher because they're an animal of the land, and yet they don't have cloven feet and chew the cud. Monkeys don't have that. So God says, don't eat monkey. But this person was eating monkey or chimp or something. So they were breaking God's commandments. Also, before you start butchering the animal in big amounts, you're supposed to, when you slit them open and degut them, you're supposed to then put koshering salt in them. I explained this in further detail a few weeks ago, and suck up all the blood. So when you're later butchering the animal, it has no blood. This person clearly didn't do that because their blood got mixed in with the monkey. So this person was not butchering properly. They were eating meat that they weren't supposed to eat. And then what happened was, before this person's body fully flushed the simian immunodeficiency virus, this person, this butcher in Africa, happened to be a homosexual. And they had sex with another man, and they passed on that simian immunovirus from them to their man. Problem with that then is that other man, his body, of course, was not instantly fighting off that virus because it was new to him. So instead of that virus being in humans for 10 days, it was going to be in him for at least a minimum of 20. During that time, that replicating virus, which was now living longer than it should have, was being more used to human DNA and augmenting itself to make it so that the human immune system could not flush it away. So then it evolved from being SIV, simian immunodeficiency virus, to being HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, which of course leads to AIDS. So that is how AIDS came about. The person was eating food God said don't eat. They were butchering in a way God said don't butcher in that way. And they were having sex with another man, which God says don't do. All those sins together has led to AIDS. God gives these commandments for our own health and well-being. We ignore them. When we ignore them, we're not punishing or hurting God or hurting ourselves. Please listen to God and obey his commandments. If you want, you have free will. Just know you disobey them at your own peril. So, that's what that tells us. Pretty strong and horrific messages, but it's the way it is. So, I said that because we were talking about if a man has sex with an animal. So, so anyway, we move on. If a woman approaches any animal and lies with it, that's again word for word from last week, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They shall surely be put to death, their blood is upon them. Hey, look, it said kill the man and the animal too. See, it's treating the genders equally. And I went into depth about why it mentions women separately last week, about the woman who had sex with the bull, disguised in a bull costume and all that in Greek mythology, which didn't exist yet at this time. But I was getting examples about how pagan cultures would oftentimes have women create of certain pagan gods with animals who represent that god, that pagan god. So that's specifically banning that. That was what I'm doing. All right, moving on. If a man takes his sister a daughter of his father or daughter of his mother, and sees her nakedness or has sex with her, and she sees his nakedness or has sex with him, is a disgrace, and they shall be cut off in the sight of the children of their people. Again, that was read last week. We read that last week. And again, that's banning incest. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness, and he shall bear his iniquity or sin. If a man lies with a woman during her menstrual period and uncovers her nakedness, he has made naked her fountain, and she has uncovered the fountain of his blood. And she has uncovered the fountain of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from among their people. Again, that's direct quote from last week as well. And I think a few weeks before that, I mentioned it at least 3 times now, that one. That if a man has sex with a woman during her period, he shall be unclean for 7 days, the length that she is unclean. He'll be unclean for the same amount. That he'll be regarded as menstruating himself. That's what it said a few weeks ago, and what it also said last week. So, that's what it's saying there. And again, it's health reasons. Unclean, you got dying flesh. I mean, I said this about a month ago when we read the first of these 3 times, where the uterus, the uterine walls, it's actual flesh being ripped off by contractions, um, bloating and all that stuff are happens because of the woman's uterine walls having spasms and tearing themselves apart. So it's not just blood. I've told you guys this a month ago. It is rotting flesh, and so a man sticks his tallywhacker into that. He's unclean for 7 days. Yeah, is what it said. So again, I'm not the one writing this stuff. Don't blame me for these topics. So where am I? So you shall be cut off from amongst the people. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or your father's sister, for that is to make naked one's relative. Your aunt. They shall bear their iniquity. Again, that's a direct quote from last week. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. Again, direct quote from last week. They shall bear their sin. They shall die childless. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is impurity. And that word, actually, the direct Hebrew word there is menstrual impurity. So if a man takes his brother's wife while his brother is still alive, it's like having sex with a menstruating woman. Unclean, unhealthy. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. Now, I want to point out here, we know from other commandments that this is the caveat that his brother is still alive. Because there's other commandments and examples in the Bible of people fulfilling this commandment and saying that they must fulfill it. And that is, it also gives the commandment, if your brother gets married and he dies before he's unable to give children to the woman who he married, that it is your brotherly duty, again, I didn't write, to give your brother's widow children, you need to have sex with her and give her children, that then will not be considered your children, but will be considered your brother's children. That's making a great sacrifice. That is a blessing. You are sacrificing what would be your inheritance, your children, for your dead brother. You're sacrificing for your brother. And by the way, then after a brother, then it went to the next relative, and the next relative, and the next relative. We have several stories in the Bible about this. The story of Tamar. Her husband died, and it was his brother's duty. Then he died. And then after that, eventually, their father, which that violates don't have sex with your son's wife, but his sons were dead, right? So see, it changes it. His sons were dead. And then Judah had sex with Tamar. And from that line comes the bloodline of Jesus. Then, later in the Bible, we have the story of Ruth. Ruth had no children to a certain point, and she had no children during the time that her first husband died, right? And then she went to Boaz, and she uncovered Boaz's feet while he was drunk. He woke up and found this drunk woman uncovering his feet. By the way, in biblical slang, the word feet can mean penis. So she uncovered his penis while he was passed out drunk. He woke up, whoa, and it says he was stalled. I would be too if a woman uncovered my penis while I was drunk and asleep. But anyway, then she has a discussion with Boaz. What she uncovered, maybe it was his feet and his penis, ambiguous. But regardless, she had a discussion with Boaz at that point. And it was revealed that he was a cousin, a distant cousin, like a second cousin, of her deceased husband. And because there were all these handsome young men at that party that she could have chose, but instead she chose Boaz, an older man. He found great delight in that. He said, you could have gone with all these younger, more handsome men. You chose the elderly one. Boaz says to her, because she favored this old man, Boaz, he said that he was willing to do his familial duty and give her children that would not be considered his, but would be considered her dead husband. He then said, however, before I can do that, I gotta say, I'm not the closest relative. There's another guy who's closer of a relative to your dead husband than me. He needs to have the chance to do those duties first, but if he rejects them, I will be more than happy to do it. And so then they went before that other relative. The other relative said, no, I don't yet have any children of my own. I will not sacrifice any of my future children for my dead cousin, like a first cousin or whatever. I will not do it. So no, I will not. And then Boaz stepped up and said, I will do it. And everyone cheered. And Boaz knew Ruth, and she became pregnant, and she had Jesse, who was the grandfather, I believe, of David, and thusly an ancestor of the Messiah. So look at that. We have Tamar and we have Ruth, both ancestors of Jesus, right? And their children were begotten through having sex with a relative of their dead husband. So that is how we know when it says, if a man takes his brother's wife, he is unclean, and they shall die childless. It's talking about while their brother is still alive. Because of those other commandments and biblical stories I just told, we know it cannot be behind it for if the man is dead. For as you know, when a man is dead, the marriage contract is null. As we've already said that in previous way. So, there you go there. Next. You shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my rules, or all my just decrees or righteous decrees, and do them, that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out, and you shall not walk in the customs of the nations or of the Gentiles that I am driving out before you, For they did all these things, and therefore I detested them. But I've said to you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim, who has separated or sanctified or made you holy, separated you from the people. You shall therefore separate the clean beast from the unclean, and the unclean bird from the clean. You shall not make yourselves detestable by beast or by bird, or by anything with which the ground falls. So it's talking about the food commandments now. Because remember, there's no chapters or verses in the Bible originally. So it's someone has just asked me a question. They asked me what Moses' parents related. They may have been cousins. The Bible said last week, again, last week we covered a lot of stuff. First cousins is allowed, and second cousins allowed. Anything like that, that's allowed. Now, were Moses' parents like brother and sister? Or not brother, well, brother and sister would never be allowed. But was it like a brother-in-law or whatever? No. They could have been cousins or something. They were both Levites. They were both of the same tribe. I know that they were both Levites. They were distantly related because they were Levites. But other than that, I can't say how close Moses' parents were to one another. You know, they were both Levites. That's all I can say. His mother was Jochebed, and his father was Amram. That's all I can say about Moses. So, of course, it's Moses who's writing down what we're reading right now. Right? So, so if you notice, now remember, the Bible does not have chapters and verses originally. So, all this that we're reading, it's still all coming from where it started with the Ten Commandments. You should have no other God before me, and so on and so forth. As far as the Bible is concerned, we've just read all this together in one day. Now, from way back then, 2 whole books ago, all the way now. So it's been just these continual commandments. So it's now relisting this whole chapter, really, is relisting a bunch of the earlier ones, going from ones that were really earlier, because it was saying the Ten Commandments at the beginning of this reading, wasn't it? And then it went on and started to re-say the rest. All right? So it didn't say all of them. We've been over a lot, but it skipped through them and said important ones, right? So now it's saying you shall therefore separate the clean beast from the unclean, and the unclean bird from the clean. You shall not make yourselves detestable by the beast or by the bird or by anything which crawls on ground. Those are the kosher food laws from a month and a half ago, which I've set apart for you to haul unclean. You shall be holy to me, or set apart to me, or you should be peculiar, strange to me. You should be different from anyone else. For I, Yahuwah, am holy, and have separated you from the people, that you should be mine. A man or a woman who is a medium or a necromancer shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned. Their blood shall be upon their hand. It repeated that a third time. So don't trust mediums or necromancers. I don't know why this portion ended with that read being said a third time, but that was the end of the Torah portion of the first reading. So now that I've read our first of our 12 readings today, so much. Amber, if you would like to read Ezekiel, our first half Torah reading, Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 2 through 20, Um, have to take out your dog. Okay. Well, would anyone else like to read Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 2 through 20? Or would you guys like me to wait for Amber?
Wait for Amber.
You're going to wait for Amber? Okay. Well, I guess it'll give me time to rest my throat and refill my cup. Sure, yeah, Amber. That'd be fine. And stop the recording.